The sound of the clock was unbearable. Tick, tick, tick. Each second sliced the air inside the doctor's office like a scalpel, precise, merciless, and deliberate. I couldn't stop staring at the second hand moving across the face of it, a small mechanical reminder that life kept going whether you were ready or not. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair, the kind that clung to hospitals and news you didn't want to hear. Dr. Levin sat across from me, her expression carefully practiced, the one they probably taught in medical school for when you have to destroy someone gently. She spoke in a tone meant to soften the impact, as though the words wouldn't cut as deep if they arrived wrapped in empathy. "We've run every test, Elise. I wanted to be sure before we talked today." She paused, as though searching for mercy somewhere on her clipboard. "Your hormone levels show premature ovarian failure. I'm afraid natural conception won't be possible." The words landed like glass breaking inside my chest. Won't be possible. That phrase kept echoing, like a verdict. I sat there, staring at her lips move, hearing the words, but not letting them in. She kept talking about options, IVF, donor eggs, adoption, like she was reciting from a manual designed for women who still had hope. But hope wasn't what I felt. It was loss, clean and surgical, slicing through the future I'd built in my head since childhood. The tiny shoes by the door, the sound of laughter echoing down a hallway that would never exist. "I'm sorry," she said softly. And that was the worst part, because she meant it. She reached across the desk, but I didn't take her hand. I couldn't. I nodded instead, because that's what strong women do when the floor disappears beneath them. I nodded, stood up, thanked her like she'd just given me a weather report, and walked out before my legs gave up. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of color that looked like the world had stopped breathing. I got into my car and just sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked hollow, rimmed red, the mascara smudged from the tears I hadn't realized had started falling. I wiped them away, angry at myself for caring, angry at the universe for thinking this was fair. I was 28 years old. I'd done everything right. I'd built a career, I'd kept myself healthy, I'd loved carefully, and somehow my body had still betrayed me. I thought of Daniel, my ex-fiancé, how he'd walked out 2 months ago after my first round of tests, saying he needed space to think. I laughed bitterly now. He'd been thinking about a life that didn't include me. He'd wanted a family, and I had become a dead end. I imagined him somewhere else, happy, with someone whose body worked the way mine didn't. By the time I realized I'd started driving, I was already halfway across the city, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. I didn't have a destination. I just needed the motion, something to keep me from falling apart. The rain started around dusk, soft at first, then harder, until the windshield blurred and the world turned into streaks of light and shadow. That's how I ended up in front of the Silver Room, a bar I'd never been inside before, the kind of place where people went to forget. I pushed the door open, and a wave of low jazz and whiskey-soaked air washed over me. It was dim inside, lit by amber lamps that made everything look softer than it was. I sat at the far end of the bar, ordered something I didn't even taste, and stared at the rows of bottles reflected in the mirror behind them. Each one glittered like 1,000 ways to escape yourself. My throat burned, but it was the kind of pain that felt good, controlled, predictable, unlike everything else in my life. That's when he sat down beside me. He didn't say anything, just the scrape of a chair, the scent of clean cologne and rain. I glanced at him once, meaning only to take a quick look, but something about him made me stop. He wasn't like anyone else in that bar. He carried stillness the way other men carried arrogance, the kind of stillness that comes from knowing no one in the room could touch you. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie, the top button undone just enough to look deliberate. His hair was black, slicked back with a kind of effortless precision that said he didn't need to try. He caught me looking, and for a second our eyes locked, his gray, storm-colored, unreadable. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, with an accent I couldn't place but felt somewhere deep in my chest. I almost laughed. Something like that. He nodded once, took a slow sip of his drink. "You don't belong here." "Neither do you," I said before I could stop myself. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. Maybe that's the point. For a moment we sat in silence. I should have turned away, should have walked out. But his voice, his presence, everything about him drew me in like gravity. "You ever drink to forget?" I asked quietly. His eyes shifted back to me. "No, I drink to remember who I am." "Who's that?" He tilted his glass, watching the liquid swirl. "A man who's forgotten what it means to feel anything real." Something in my chest twisted. "Maybe that's lucky," I said. "Feeling hurts." "Then maybe you're the unlucky one." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Tonight I don't want to be anyone at all." He looked at me for a long time, as if weighing something, then set his glass down. "Then don't be," he said. "Not tonight." That's how it started. Two strangers sitting in the half-light, trying not to exist. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. His hand brushed mine once when he paid the tab, and the shock of it went straight through me, alive and dangerous. The kind of touch that isn't an accident. When he stood, I followed, though neither of us said where we were going. The city outside was wet and shimmering, reflections stretching across the pavement like veins of light. I remember thinking how quiet he was as we walked, how the noise of the city seemed to bend around him, how people stepped aside without realizing why. His name, when he finally told me in the elevator, sounded like a confession. Luca. Just that. Luca. And me, Elise, trying to pretend I didn't recognize the danger in his eyes, that pull of something dark and magnetic that should have sent me running. But I was tired of running. I was tired of being careful. That night I wanted to forget that my body had betrayed me, that I was unlovable, unworthy, broken. I wanted to feel something reckless, something alive. The rest blurred, fingers against glass, breath against skin, the city lights painting his face gold and shadow. He moved like a man who'd learned to control everything, even chaos. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers. I wanted oblivion, and he gave it to me with quiet precision, like a sin whispered instead of shouted. When morning came, I woke alone. The space beside me was cold, the sheets smooth where his body had been. The only proof he'd been real was the scent left behind: smoke, cedar, rain, and a single note on the nightstand in handwriting that was too elegant to belong to a stranger from a bar. "Don't look for me." I stared at it until the words blurred. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't care, that he was a mistake I could fold away like a bad dream. But as I dressed, the air around me felt different, charged, like something had shifted beneath my skin. Days passed. I went back to work, smiled when people asked how I was, pretended the world hadn't ended in a doctor's office. Until one morning, standing in front of the mirror, I felt it. Nausea, sudden and fierce, followed by a dizziness that made the room tilt. It happened again the next day, and the next. At first, I blamed stress, exhaustion, grief. But a small, treacherous voice whispered the impossible. No, I couldn't be. I drove to the pharmacy like a woman possessed, bought the test, locked myself in the bathroom, and waited. 2 minutes. That's all it took. The longest 2 minutes of my life. When the lines appeared, bold and undeniable, my knees gave out. Positive. I laughed then, half hysteria, half disbelief, as the room spun around me, The woman who couldn't conceive was pregnant, and the father was the man who had vanished before dawn. The bathroom floor was cold against my knees, but I barely felt it. My hands shook so violently that the little stick clattered onto the tile, the two pink lines staring up at me like a verdict written by God himself. Positive. No hesitation, no faint shadow of maybe, just bold, undeniable proof of something that should have been impossible. My throat burned as I laughed, because crying felt too dangerous. If I started, I wasn't sure I'd ever stop. The world didn't make sense anymore. I thought of Dr. Levin's soft voice, the sterile smell of her office, the pity in her eyes when she said failure. I thought of Daniel walking out, of all the things I'd told myself I would never have to feel again. And yet here it was. Life, or the promise of it. Small, fragile, miraculous, and terrifying. I pressed my palms to my face, whispering to the universe that there must have been some mistake, but the silence that answered me was mercilessly certain. For 3 days, I lived in denial. I hid the test at the bottom of my wastebasket, buried under tissues and wrappers like it might vanish if I refused to look. But the nausea didn't vanish. It grew. So did the ache in my chest, the quiet pulse of something that wasn't just fear. It felt like defiance. On the 4th morning, I made another appointment, and by evening I was back under the fluorescent lights that had already broken me once. Dr. Levin stared at the results twice before speaking. Her voice trembled, betraying the professional calm she tried to wear. "Elise, I can't explain this, but you're about 6 weeks along." She looked up, searching my face as if waiting for anger or disbelief. Sometimes the body surprises us. Surprises, what a small word for a miracle. I left her office without speaking, the echo of her astonishment chasing me down the hallway. Outside, the city was humming with its usual indifference. People rushing, horns blaring, rain threatening again. I wrapped my coat tighter around me and realized I was trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer weight of what this meant. Inside me, against every scientific certainty, something was growing. Someone. And then came the other realization, the one that hollowed me out and filled me with fire in the same breath. Luca. The man with eyes like winter storms and hands that made me forget who I was for one reckless night. The stranger who disappeared before the sun could touch him. He was the father. My mind tried to deny it, but my body already knew. He had branded himself into my memory in ways I couldn't erase. His voice, his steadiness, the darkness that both frightened and comforted me. It all came rushing back with cruel precision. For the next week, I haunted my own apartment. Sleep came in fragments. Food tasted like dust. Every sound outside made me jump. I told no one. How could I? Even the thought of explaining felt impossible. It wasn't just the pregnancy, it was him. Luca Moretti. The name still tasted dangerous on my tongue. He had said, "Don't look for me," and part of me knew why. He wasn't just any man. The way people had stepped aside for him that night. The whispered tension in the bar. The effortless command. He was someone powerful, someone untouchable. And yet he had touched me. I tried to convince myself to leave it alone, to raise this child quietly, to protect it from whatever shadow he carried. But curiosity is its own kind of hunger, and mine grew until it consumed every thought. One evening, I sat at my computer and typed his name. The search results exploded like sparks in the dark. Luca Moretti, CEO of Moretti Holdings. That was the first line. But the deeper I looked, the stranger it became. Whispers of connections, rumors of criminal networks, words like syndicate and enforcer buried between lines about legitimate business ventures. There were photographs too, grainy, taken at charity galas, political dinners. He never smiled in any of them. Always the same posture, the same stillness. A man who controlled everything except the truth behind his own eyes. I closed the laptop, heart pounding. What kind of world had I stepped into? What kind of father would this child have? That night I dreamed of him, his hand against my face, the city lights behind him like stars caught in glass. When I woke, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. Fear wasn't protection, it was a cage. If I wanted peace, I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. So I went back to the silver room. The bartender recognized me. He raised an eyebrow when I asked, "Do you know Luca Moretti?" His pause was too long, his eyes too careful. "I don't ask questions like that," he said finally, "but you're not the first to come looking for him." He slid a napkin across the counter, blank except for a single address scrawled in pencil. "Don't tell anyone I gave you this." The address led me downtown, to glass towers and private elevators, the kind of luxury that hums with quiet menace. I stood outside the entrance of Moretti Holdings, feeling absurd in my rain-spotted coat, my cheap umbrella, my shaking hands. The security guards looked carved from marble, their earpieces glinting. I almost turned back. Almost. But then the nausea came again. Sharp and relentless, a reminder of what was at stake. I pressed my hand to my stomach, took a breath, and walked inside. The lobby smelled of money, leather, polished stone, faint cologne. People moved with purpose, every step measured. When I told the receptionist I needed to see Mr. Moretti, she looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already certain I didn't. "I just need 5 minutes," I said. "It's personal." Her polite smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, that's not possible." Something inside me snapped then, the same part that had carried me through sleepless nights. Heartbreak. Diagnosis. I leaned forward, voice trembling but unyielding. "Tell him it's about something he left behind." Maybe it was the phrasing, or maybe it was the sheer audacity in my tone. But the receptionist faltered. She made a call, whispered something, then looked up at me with disbelief. "He'll see you." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, the air changed. Quieter, colder. His office was vast, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, dark wood, and silence so deep it felt sacred. He stood by the window, back turned, hands clasped behind him. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. "Mr. Moretti," I said softly. He turned. The moment our eyes met, everything inside me splintered. He looked the same, impossibly composed, those same gray eyes that made you forget your name. For a moment there was recognition, then calculation, then something sharper. "Miss," he began, but stopped when he saw my face fully. "Elise." The sound of my name in his voice undid me. I stepped forward, words catching. "I need to talk to you." He studied me like he was dissecting a problem. "People usually don't come here uninvited. This isn't a usual conversation." A flicker of curiosity crossed his face. "Then by all means, speak." My throat felt dry. Every rehearsed word vanished. In the end, I just said it. "I'm pregnant." For the first time, I saw him lose control. His expression didn't change much, just the smallest shift, the tightening of his jaw, but it was enough to make the room feel colder. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then very quietly, "You're sure?" "Yes." He looked past me toward the city, as if searching for logic in the chaos. When he spoke again, his voice was measured steel. "Leave this building, Miss Hart, right now." "What?" I whispered. "Whatever this is, you don't want to be part of it." "I didn't choose this." My voice broke. "I came because you deserve to know." He turned then, eyes sharp enough to cut. "I don't deserve anything." And just like that, the walls came down between us again. But before he could dismiss me, I saw it. The briefest flicker of fear. Not for himself, but for me. And I knew, without him saying it, that I had just stepped into a world I couldn't leave. For a long moment after his words, there was nothing. No sound, no breath. Just the steady hum of the city far below. A muted thunder that felt miles away. I stood there in his office, staring at him, the weight of his denial pressing against me like gravity. He had said it so coldly, so easily, as though I were just another problem that could be dismissed with a single order. Leave this building, Miss Hart. As if I were no one. As if the truth growing inside me could be erased with the same precision he used to erase people from his life. But I didn't move. I'm not leaving, I said finally, though my voice trembled. He turned from the window, the light catching the sharp lines of his face. You don't understand, he said, each word clipped and deliberate, the kind of tone used by men who are obeyed without question. You walked into a world you have no place in, and now you need to walk out before it swallows you whole. Too late for that, I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes, a flash of recognition, maybe regret. He took a slow step closer. Do you have any idea who I am? I think I'm starting to, I said, and that's why I came. Because whether you like it or not, I can't undo what happened. I'm pregnant, Luca. His name tasted dangerous on my tongue, a sound that carried too much power. He stopped walking. The silence between us grew taut, stretched to the edge of breaking. You shouldn't even be here, he muttered finally. This. He gestured between us, the faintest movement of his hand. Was never supposed to happen. Do you think I planned it? My voice rose before I could stop it. You think I wanted this? That I asked for a miracle just to watch you pretend it doesn't exist? The mask cracked then. Not much, but enough. His jaw tightened. His breath came faster. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what this means. I know exactly what it means, I said, stepping toward him. It means you have a choice. You can pretend I never existed, or you can stop hiding behind that empty stare and act like the man you really are. He laughed once, low and humorless. You think you know what kind of man I am? You saw me for a few hours in a hotel room. You don't know anything about me, Elise. I know enough to be afraid, I said quietly, but I'm still here. He blinked, something shifting behind his expression. For the first time since I'd entered, the steel in his eyes softened, replaced by something like disbelief. You really don't scare easily, do you? Not anymore, I said. Fear doesn't work when you've already lost everything. He looked away then, his shoulders stiff. You don't get it. My world doesn't forgive weakness. And you... He trailed off, catching himself. And me? He didn't answer. He just turned back to the window, his reflection a silhouette of contradictions. Strength, guilt, danger. The kind of man who ruled through silence because silence was safer than confession. Finally he spoke, his voice low. If you stay, you'll destroy what little peace you have left. There are people who would use you to get to me. They'll hurt you just to make me bleed. Something in his tone told me it wasn't a threat. It was a memory. He wasn't warning me. He was remembering someone else who hadn't listened. Then protect me, I said. He turned so fast I flinched. You think it's that simple? Yes. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint mix of rain and smoke that had haunted me for weeks. You don't know what you're asking for, he said, his voice rough. Protection from me is the last thing you'll ever get. Then maybe I don't want protection, I said, forcing the words out even as my heart pounded. Maybe I just want the truth. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment the air between us felt charged, alive, like a storm building without wind. You wouldn't survive the truth, he said softly. Try me. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You're pregnant with a child whose father owns half this city and controls the other half with fear. There are men who would kill you just for saying my name out loud. That's the truth. I didn't flinch. Then let them try. He stared at me for so long I thought he might actually throw me out. Instead, he did something worse. He smiled. Not the kind that warms a room. No, this was the kind that chilled it. You're braver than I thought, he said. Or more foolish. Maybe both. He walked back to his desk, pressed a button on the phone. Adrian, he said, his tone suddenly that of a man used to giving orders that weren't questioned. I need a car sent to the south entrance. 2 guards. No one else. I frowned. What are you doing? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally looked at me again, his eyes had changed. No longer the storm, but something quieter, determined. You're coming with me, he said. What? Until I know who else knows about this, you don't leave my sight. Luca, that's not necessary. It is, he said sharply. If I let you walk out of here, you won't make it through the week. The certainty in his voice turned my blood cold. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was overreacting. But the look on his face stopped me. This wasn't arrogance. It was experience. He'd seen it before. People turned into leverage, lives used as bargaining chips. I was no longer just a woman with a secret. I was a liability. He rounded the desk, his presence filling the space like a shadow. You'll stay at my house tonight, he said. I have a home. Not anymore. It should have sounded cruel, but there was something else beneath it. An ache, a fracture in his control. I realized he wasn't just protecting me. He was terrified. The elevator ride down felt like falling. His guards waited by the car, tall, silent men whose eyes never stopped scanning the street. Luca opened the door himself, and when our hands brushed, a spark shot through me. The air inside the car smelled like leather and danger. As the city lights blurred past, I turned to him. Do you always make decisions for people without asking? He looked at me then, a faint smirk ghosting his lips. Only when their lives depend on it. And mine does? Yes, he said simply, because whether you believe it or not, you're mine now. The words hit harder than a threat. They weren't possessive. They were prophetic. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt a strange, treacherous comfort, like I'd been claimed by something I couldn't name. We drove in silence after that, the kind that hums with everything unsaid. When the gates finally opened onto a long, winding drive lined with cypress trees, I caught a glimpse of the house at the end. Stone, massive, secluded, a fortress. This is where you live? I asked quietly. This is where I keep the things I can't afford to lose, he said. I looked at him, heart stuttering. And which am I? He didn't answer. But the way his hand tightened on the steering wheel told me the truth before his words ever could. The drive to his estate felt endless, the city's glow fading behind us until only darkness remained, thick and heavy as velvet. Rain trailed down the windows, catching faint flashes of the moon, and every curve of the road seemed to lead further from the world I knew. Luca didn't speak much. He sat beside me, calm as stone, eyes fixed ahead, one hand resting on the wheel in that unhurried way that somehow felt like control disguised as ease. I watched the reflection of passing trees in the glass and thought how strange it was that a single night could undo everything I had ever been sure of. When we finally turned through a pair of wrought iron gates, they opened with the soft groan of something ancient and accustomed to secrets. The house appeared a moment later. No, not a house. A fortress. The kind of place built to keep the world out and its owner untouched. 3 stories of pale stone stood against the dark sky, its windows glowing faintly with warm light. But the warmth felt deceptive, like a candle burning inside a tomb. Luca parked in front, cut the engine, and turned to me. "You'll stay here for now," he said simply, as if this were a conversation we'd had 100 times before. His voice was calm, but there was no room for argument in it. I looked up at the house, then back at him. "For how long?" "Until I know it's safe." "And if it never is?" He hesitated then, only for a second, but I saw it, the small fracture in his composure. "Then you'll learn to live with the danger," he said. "Like I do." The front doors opened before he even reached them. 2 men stood waiting, both dressed in black, their faces expressionless. One nodded briefly to Luca, then disappeared into the shadows of the hallway beyond. I followed him inside, my shoes echoing faintly against the marble. The air was different here. Cool, expensive, scented faintly with cedar and old books. Every piece of furniture looked deliberate, chosen by someone who valued silence over comfort. A fire burned low in the grand hearth, and somewhere deeper in the house, a clock chimed softly. "You can use the guest room on the 2nd floor," he said, his hand gesturing toward the staircase. "If you need anything, ask Rosa. She's the only one in this house I trust." I nodded, trying to read his tone, to find some trace of kindness beneath the command. "And what about you?" I asked quietly. He paused halfway up the stairs, turning just enough that the light caught his profile. "What about me?" "Can I trust you?" He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't," he said at last, and then continued up the stairs. I stood there long after he disappeared, the fire snapping behind me, the shadows pressing closer. It should have frightened me, but it didn't. It was the honesty in his words that unsettled me most. How easily he admitted to being the danger I already knew he was. The room Rosa led me to was enormous, its windows draped in heavy curtains that muted the sound of the rain. The bed looked untouched, the air faintly perfumed with lavender and something darker, muskier. "If you need anything," she said softly, her accent lilting and warm, "ring the bell by the door. Mr. Moretti doesn't like unannounced guests wandering the halls." "I'm not a guest," I murmured before I could stop myself. She gave a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No one ever is." When she left, I wandered the room, touching the smooth surface of the desk, the cold metal of the balcony latch. Outside, the gardens stretched into darkness, the faint outline of statues gleaming in the rain. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum of restraint, a place where emotions were not allowed to make noise. I didn't see Luca again until morning. I barely slept, waking at every sound, half expecting him to appear. When I finally went downstairs, the house was alive with quiet movement. Voices in the distance. Footsteps that vanished before I could follow them. I found him in the library, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, sunlight catching the edge of his jaw. He looked almost human in that moment, almost at peace. He didn't turn when I entered, but I knew he'd heard me. "You should eat," he said. "Rosa left breakfast in the kitchen." "I'm not hungry." "You should be," he said, setting the cup down. "You're not taking care of yourself." Something in his tone, soft but firm, sparked irritation. "I don't need you telling me what to do." He finally turned, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Then stop acting like you do." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. "You dragged me here against my will. I kept you alive." "Is that what this is?" I asked, gesturing around. "Protection?" "It feels more like imprisonment." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You think this is a cage? Try living out there where every man with a grudge knows your name. At least here, no one can reach you." "No one can reach me anywhere," I said, quieter now. "That's not safety, Luca. That's loneliness." He looked at me then. Really looked, and for a moment the hardness slipped. "You talk like you've never been afraid," he said. "I've been afraid every day since the doctor told me I couldn't have this," I said, pressing my palm to my stomach. "And now that I do, I'll be afraid every day of losing it. Fear doesn't make me fragile, it makes me desperate to survive." He didn't speak, but something in his expression softened, as though he understood more than he wanted to. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "Neither are you." He smiled then, faint and brief, the kind of smile that looks like it hurts to make. "Eat," he said again, his voice gentler now. "You'll need your strength." And then he left the room before I could ask why. Days bled into each other after that. The house became a strange rhythm. Quiet mornings, whispered conversations, the distant hum of engines somewhere beyond the walls. Sometimes I caught glimpses of Luca in the hallways, his phone pressed to his ear, his jaw set in that way that meant something was wrong. Other times he disappeared for hours and I would find myself pacing the floor, wondering if he'd ever come back. I told myself I didn't care, but every time the front doors opened, my heart betrayed me. One night I found him in the garden. He stood under the cypress trees, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. The moonlight softened the sharpness of him, turned him almost tender. I didn't mean to speak, but the words slipped out. "You never sleep, do you?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Not if I can help it." "Afraid of dreams?" "Afraid of memory." I walked closer, the wet grass brushing my feet. "You think you can protect everyone by never closing your eyes?" He laughed softly, a sound more sorrow than humor. "It's worked so far." We stood there for a long time, neither moving, the air between us heavy with everything we didn't say. Finally, I whispered, "You can't keep me here forever." He exhaled smoke into the night. "No," he said, "but for now I have to." "Why?" His eyes met mine then, unguarded for the first time. "Because you don't understand what you mean to them, or to me." The words hung there, unspoken between fear and confession. I should have asked what he meant, but I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew. And in that moment, standing in the darkness with him, I realized that my cage wasn't made of walls or locks. It was made of him. It began with a sound that did not belong in the quiet. I had grown used to the rhythm of this house. The low crackle of the fireplace, the whisper of rain against the windows, the muted echo of footsteps that always stopped before they reached my door. But that morning, there was something else. Something sharp and metallic. The distant crash of glass shattering somewhere deep within the walls. The noise froze me mid-step. A heartbeat later, I heard voices, low, urgent, dangerous. I didn't think. I moved. Instinct carried me down the corridor toward the sound. The marble floor felt like ice beneath my bare feet, and every breath sounded too loud in my ears. I reached the landing just as two of Luca's men hurried past, their movements swift and deliberate, weapons drawn. One of them saw me and stopped. "Miss Hart, you need to go back to your room." "What's happening?" "Please," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Mr. Moretti's orders." Before I could answer, another voice cut through the hallway. "Stand down!" Luca appeared at the far end, coat unbuttoned, eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. The two men stepped aside immediately. He didn't look at them. His gaze locked on me. "Elise," he said quietly, "go upstairs. Now." Something in his voice made the rest of the world fall away. I obeyed, but only far enough that I could watch from the shadows of the stairwell. Two more men entered carrying a shattered box, its contents spilling across the floor. Photographs, I realized, glossy prints sliding through pools of rainwater. Even from where I stood, I could see what they were. Me, taken through windows, across streets, from impossible angles, Me walking in the garden, me sitting by the library window, me sleeping. Luca bent down, picked up one of the photographs, and stared at it for a long time. When he straightened, the air itself seemed to tighten around him. Where did this come from? One of the outer cameras caught movement by the east wall, one guard said. They must have breached the perimeter during the storm. Find them. His voice was low, calm, the kind of calm that hides violence beneath it. I want names by sundown. The guards vanished. For a moment, only the wind filled the silence, rattling the window panes. Luca stayed where he was, staring at the photographs scattered across the floor, as though trying to see through them. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. They were watching me, I said softly. He didn't turn. They were watching me. You were just the easiest way in. The words hit harder than I expected. So I'm bait now? He finally looked at me then, and the fury in his eyes wasn't directed at me, but at the world itself. Your leverage, he said. That's worse. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the tremor in his voice silenced me. He moved closer, each step measured, controlled. From now on, he said, you don't leave this room without me or one of my men. No walks, no gardens, no windows open. Do you understand? I hated the command in his tone, but I nodded. He reached out then, almost against his own will, fingers brushing my arm. The touch was fleeting, but it grounded me, tethered me to something real. I told you this world would find you, he said quietly. I just didn't think it would happen this soon. That night the house changed. The lights stayed on in the hallways, guards posted at every door. I could feel the tension humming through the walls like electricity. Even Rosa moved differently, her usual calm replaced by glances toward the windows. Luca disappeared into his office for hours, and when I passed by once, I heard the edge in his voice as he spoke on the phone. Italian. Fast. Lethal. I didn't need to understand the words to know someone was paying for what had happened. When he finally came to my room, it was nearly midnight. He looked exhausted, the lines of power on his face drawn tighter than ever. It's contained, he said, though I wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. He poured himself a drink and stared into it. They know about you. About the baby. My chest tightened. How? There are always leaks, he said bitterly. Money buys loyalty until someone offers more. But whoever sent those men knew exactly where to look. I swallowed hard. So what now? He set the glass down untouched. Now I make sure they never come near you again. There was something in his voice that frightened me more than the threat itself. A cold certainty. A promise of violence. Luca, I said, stepping closer. Don't do something you'll regret. He looked at me then, and I realized regret wasn't part of his vocabulary. In my world, he said softly, regret is what happens when you hesitate. He turned to leave, but I caught his hand. It was the first time I had touched him without fear. You can't fight everyone, I whispered. You can't save me by destroying yourself. He stared at our joined hands, and for the briefest moment, the hardness in him cracked. I don't know how to do anything else, he said, and then he was gone. The next days blurred into unease. Every noise outside made me flinch. Every shadow felt too deep. The guards spoke little, their eyes always scanning the horizon. Luca moved through the house like a ghost, appearing, disappearing, making calls that ended in slammed phones and muttered curses. But beneath the fury, I could see the fear he tried so hard to hide. Not for himself. For me. One evening, Rosa brought me tea and whispered, "He hasn't slept in 2 days." I found him later in the library, the same place he always retreated to when he wanted to be alone. The firelight painted his face in shades of gold and shadow. He looked up when I entered but didn't speak. I sat across from him, the silence thick but not uncomfortable. Finally, I said, "You can't keep doing this." He gave a small, humorless smile. "You sound like someone who doesn't understand what it means to keep a promise. And you sound like someone who doesn't know when to stop bleeding for people who never asked you to." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You think I'm doing this for myself? I think you're doing it because you don't know how to care any other way." The words landed between us like sparks. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he rose, came around the desk, and stopped in front of me. He didn't touch me, but the closeness was dizzying. "You don't understand," he said, quietly. "Every man who's ever stood where I stand has paid for love with blood. I won't let that be you." My pulse raced, but I didn't back away. "Maybe you don't get to choose that." He inhaled sharply, and for the first time I saw something like surrender in his eyes. "Then God help us both," he whispered. Later that night, I woke to the sound of engines outside. Lights swept across the windows, voices shouting orders. I ran to the balcony just in time to see Luca below, barking commands, his men scattering like shadows. Someone had breached the gates again. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Brief, sharp, final. And then silence. Luca looked up at me through the darkness, his expression unreadable. "Get inside," he shouted. But even from there, I could see the blood on his sleeve. My heart stopped. I turned toward the door, half ready to run to him. And that's when I saw it, etched across the balcony rail in something dark and glistening. A single word written in a language I didn't understand, but I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. A warning. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the noise outside faded, even after the engines disappeared and the shouting stopped, my body refused to believe the danger was over. The air in my room still smelled faintly of gunpowder and rain, a mixture that clung to the curtains like a bad dream that wouldn't leave. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that word scrawled across the balcony rail, the metallic gleam of blood catching the moonlight. A message. A threat. A promise. I wanted to believe it was over when the house finally fell quiet, but I could still feel the pulse of tension humming beneath the silence. I waited until the first gray light touched the horizon before I left my room, drawn by something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or the ache of needing to know if he was still alive. I found Luca in the study. The door was open, and the scent of whiskey drifted out into the hallway. He sat behind the desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. There was a cut across his cheek, the kind of shallow wound that would sting more than it would scar. But it was the look in his eyes that stopped me. Not anger. Not exhaustion. Something deeper. The look of a man haunted by his own hands. I stepped into the room, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're hurt." He didn't look up. "It's nothing." "Someone bled outside my door, Luca. That's not nothing." He exhaled, the sound heavy, tired. "You shouldn't have seen that." "I live here now," I said. "I see everything." That made him look at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes, usually so unreadable, were darker than I'd ever seen them. "You don't understand what you've stepped into," he said finally. "You keep trying to make sense of it like it's something you can fix. You can't. There's no fixing this world." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Tell me what it is I'm supposed to be afraid of." He rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, like a storm gathering its weight. "Afraid?" he said softly. "You should be terrified." "I am," I whispered, "but that doesn't stop it. So stop treating me like glass and start treating me like someone who deserves the truth." He stared at me for a long time, jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he turned away. Bracing himself against the edge of the desk, as if deciding whether the truth would kill me faster than the lie. When my father was alive, he began, his voice low and uneven. He ran this family like a kingdom. There were rules, alliances, bloodlines. Everything was about control. But control is an illusion. It always has been. He thought he could keep peace through fear, but fear grows its own hunger. I said nothing. I let the rhythm of his words guide me into a place I hadn't been allowed to see before. He was betrayed, Luca continued. A rival family, people we'd trusted for decades. They came for him in the night. They didn't just kill him, they made it a message. I was 21 when I found him. His voice broke for just a heartbeat, then steadied. After that, I did what he never could. I made sure no one ever forgot his name. My throat felt tight. You took his place. I became the thing they feared, he said simply. It's the only way to survive in this world, the only way to make sure no one you love dies for you. The words hung between us, heavy and bitter. Is that what this is then? I asked. Love? He laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement. Love doesn't survive in my world, Elise. It's a liability, a weakness. Then why am I still here? I asked quietly. That question lingered in the air longer than it should have. He looked at me like he wanted to find an answer but couldn't. Because you shouldn't have been able to exist, he said finally. And yet here you are. You're the one thing in my life I can't explain, and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could. I took a step toward him, my voice trembling. You don't have to protect me by shutting me out. He shook his head. You think I'm doing this for you? I'm doing it because if they find out what you mean to me, they'll use you to destroy everything I've built. I don't care about what you've built, I said. I care about what's real. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time since that night in the bar. The mask fell away, and what I saw beneath it wasn't a monster or a king. It was a man who hadn't slept in years, a man who carried the weight of every life he'd taken, every promise he'd broken. He took a slow breath, and for the first time he didn't try to hide the exhaustion in his voice. Do you know what happens when you finally start to feel again after years of trying not to? I shook my head. It hurts, he said. It hurts like hell. I closed the distance between us until I could feel the heat of his breath. Then let it hurt. He stared at me for a long moment, the silence between us heavy, electric. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my cheek, softly as if afraid I might disappear. The touch wasn't possessive. It was reverent, fragile. You make me want things I shouldn't, he whispered. And what do you want? His eyes met mine, and for the first time there was no distance, no power, just truth. Peace, he said. And I don't know if I'll ever have it. The words struck something deep inside me. For all his power, for all the fear he inspired, this man was still searching for something as simple as quiet. I reached up, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the tension there. Maybe peace isn't something you find, I said. Maybe it's something you stop running from. He closed his eyes, exhaling like someone standing on the edge of surrender. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. Yes, I do, I said. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're made of stone. He opened his eyes again, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was no mask at all. If you stay near me, they'll keep coming, he said softly. They won't stop until they've taken everything from me, including you. Then let them come, I whispered. I've already survived the worst. He took a step back, breaking the fragile distance between us, running a hand through his hair. You don't know what you're saying? Maybe not, I said, but I know I'm not walking away. He looked at me for a long time, too long, and I saw the war in his eyes, the way he wanted to believe. the way he couldn't allow himself to. Finally, he turned toward the window, the dawn light cutting across his face. "Then you should know something," he said, his voice low. "The men who sent that message, they're not just rivals, they're the ones who killed my father. And they're not after me anymore." I froze. "What do you mean?" "They want the child," he said, "because in this world bloodlines are power." It happened in the quiet hour before dawn, when the world still felt half asleep and every sound carried farther than it should. I remember the faint creak of the hallway outside my door, the way it barely rose above the whisper of the wind. For a moment I thought it was Rosa bringing tea early, the way she sometimes did when Luca returned from one of his endless late-night calls. But then the floorboards groaned again, heavier this time, slower, deliberate. And something deep inside me knew that whatever waited beyond that door was not Rosa, and it was not safety. The handle turned. My breath caught. I moved before I could think, sliding off the bed and pressing myself against the wall behind the dresser, the way a child hides from thunder. The door opened soundlessly, and moonlight spilled across the carpet in a thin silver line that caught on boots, on a shadow that didn't belong here. 2 of them. I saw the glint of metal first, the shape of a gun, the faint scent of smoke and rain still clinging to their coats. "Take her quietly," one of them murmured in Italian, his voice a rasp that made my stomach twist. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood enough. I ran. Not because I believed I could escape. Some part of me knew they'd planned too carefully for that. But because the instinct to run lives somewhere older than reason. The hallway was darker than I expected, my bare feet sliding across polished floors, my pulse thundering so loud I could barely hear anything else. I made it halfway to the stairs before a hand caught my wrist, rough and cold, jerking me back. I kicked, clawed, screamed his name, "Luca," but the sound died against the man's gloved palm. A cloth pressed over my face, sharp and chemical. For a moment the world tilted, the edges melting like wax in heat. The last thing I remember before darkness took me was the echo of footsteps pounding somewhere distant. His footsteps. And the sound of his voice roaring my name like it was the only word he'd ever learned to speak. When I woke, the air was different. Heavy. Still. My head throbbed, every heartbeat a hammer behind my eyes. I was sitting in a chair, wrists bound, the faint rustle of rope scraping skin each time I moved. A single bulb swung overhead, its light flickering in slow, hypnotic patterns that made the shadows crawl across the walls. The room smelled of rust and salt, and something older. The unmistakable dampness of an abandoned place. Water dripped somewhere behind me, slow and steady. A clock without hands. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my tongue thick from the drug. For a while there was only the sound of my breathing, too loud in the small room. Then a voice, low, unfamiliar, broke through. "You're awake." He stepped from the shadows, a man in a dark coat, his features half hidden by the swinging light. He wasn't young, though not old either, his face marked by the kind of scars that come from earning fear the hard way. I was beginning to think Moretti's woman was made of stone. "I'm not his anything," I managed, though my voice trembled. He smiled, slow and cold. "No? Then why did he burn 2 of my warehouses to the ground last night looking for you?" The words hit like a physical blow. I looked down, unable to hide the shiver that ran through me. He stepped closer, circling me the way a predator circles prey not yet ready to be killed. "You see, Elise, your name has become a very expensive word in this city. Do you have any idea what it's worth to know that the untouchable Luca Moretti finally has something he can't afford to lose?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "You think he'll pay for me?" He laughed softly. "Oh, he'll pay. In blood." He turned away, lighting a cigarette with hands that didn't shake. "Until then, You'll stay here. Comfortable enough to live, not enough to forget who put you here. When he comes, and he will, I'll let him watch before I take everything from him, the way he took everything from me. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. His hatred filled the room like smoke, choking, invisible everywhere. When he left, the door locked behind him with a sound that felt final. I sat there in the half-light, the ropes biting deeper into my wrists, the taste of fear metallic on my tongue. For the first time, I understood what Luca had meant when he said love in his world was a weapon. They weren't after me because of who I was. They were after him through the piece of his soul he'd failed to keep hidden. Hours passed, maybe longer. I measured time by the dripping water, by the ache in my shoulders, by the fading light. At some point, I began to whisper to the air, not sure if I was praying or begging. "Please find me," I said. "Please." Somewhere, impossibly far away, I imagined him moving through the city like a storm. Cold, relentless, unstoppable. I could almost hear his voice, low and furious, ordering men into the streets, tearing the night apart to find me. I closed my eyes and clung to that sound even though it wasn't real. The next time the door opened, it wasn't the scarred man who entered. It was someone else, smaller, younger, a boy, maybe 17, eyes too kind for this place. He held a glass of water. "You should drink," he said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to bring it, but you look like you might faint." "Who are you?" I whispered. "No one," he said, and for a moment his voice cracked. My mother used to work for him, before Moretti took the docks. I owe him, but not like this." He untied the ropes at my wrists, just enough to let blood return to my hands, and pressed the glass into them. "Don't try to run," he said. "They'll kill you before you reach the door." "Then why help me?" He looked at me, something breaking behind his eyes. "Because when he comes for you, I don't want to be standing between him and anyone else." Then he was gone, leaving me with shaking hands and a plan that wasn't really a plan at all. Just hope, thin and fragile as glass. I don't know how much time passed before I heard it. The distant thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Engines, many of them. Then shouting, gunfire, the kind that rips through silence like a scream. The bulb overhead swung wildly, light flashing across walls now alive with motion. I tried to stand, stumbled, forced myself toward the door still half bound. It burst, open before I reached it. Luca filled the doorway. Not the composed man in the tailored suit I'd met in that bar, but something rawer, darker, stripped of civility. His shirt was torn, streaked with blood, his eyes blazing with the kind of fury that doesn't leave survivors. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he was there, his hands on my face, his voice a rasp against my ear. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, though tears blurred everything. "You shouldn't have come." He laughed, harsh and breathless. "I told you I don't know how to do anything else." Behind him, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, a reminder that this wasn't over. He lifted me as though I weighed nothing, carried me out into the storm. The rain hit hard, washing the blood from his skin, but not from his eyes. When we reached the car, he set me down, his hands still trembling. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "You almost did." He closed his eyes, forehead against mine, the world around us dissolving into rain and light. "I won't let them touch you again," he said, each word a vow carved from something older than mercy. And in that moment, I believed him, even though the sky itself seemed to warn me that nothing about what was coming next would be merciful. The car's engine roared through the night, tires slicing through rain and mud, headlights cutting pale tunnels of light through the storm. I sat pressed against Luca's side, wrapped in his coat, his arm anchoring me as if the world might try to take me again if he loosened his hold even for a breath. I could feel his heartbeat through the fabric, fast, unsteady. Too human for a man who was supposed to be unbreakable. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was louder than the thunder, filled with things we didn't know how to say. When the gates of the estate finally appeared through the rain, the guards swung them open without a word. I caught flashes of faces, grim, watchful, men who looked at Luca not with fear, but with the heavy respect given to someone who had just walked through hell and returned carrying the thing he refused to lose. The car rolled to a stop in front of the house, and for the first time since the warehouse, I realized how badly he was shaking. "Luca," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just opened his door, stepped into the rain, and came around to mine. His hand was trembling when it found mine, though his face remained carved from stone. "You're safe now," he said, his voice hoarse. I wanted to believe him. I wanted those words to be true. But safety was an illusion in his world, and both of us knew it. Inside, the air felt too still, too warm. Rosa rushed toward me, her eyes wide with horror, her hands fluttering over my face, my wrists, checking for wounds. "Madonna Santa," she murmured, half in prayer. "We thought—" She stopped herself, her voice breaking. "Come, you need rest." But Luca's hand was still on my arm, his grip too firm, too desperate. "Not yet," he said. "She stays with me." Rosa looked between us, then nodded silently and disappeared. He led me upstairs past the dim glow of lamps and the faint echo of whispered orders from below. The hallway smelled faintly of smoke and gun oil. His world had a scent now, and it was everywhere. When we reached his room, he finally let go of my hand, closing the door behind us with a quiet click. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain battered the windows, relentless. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, one hand pressed against his ribs. That's when I saw it, the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "You're hurt," I said, the words sharp with fear. "It's nothing," he muttered, but his voice betrayed him. I crossed the space between us and pushed his hand aside. The fabric was soaked through, the wound deep enough to make my stomach twist. "Sit down," I ordered. He almost smiled at that, a weary, ghost-like thing. "You think you can command me?" "Yes," I said, pulling him toward the edge of the bed. "Right now I can." He didn't argue. For once, the man who ruled empires simply obeyed. I tore the fabric open with shaking fingers, revealing the wound, a bullet graze, angry and red, the kind that would scar but not kill. I pressed a towel against it, my hands slick with his blood, and felt his muscles tighten beneath my touch. "You shouldn't have come for me," I whispered, not because I meant it, but because the truth of what he'd done terrified me. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and something deeper, something like devotion. "There's not a place on this earth they could have hidden you where I wouldn't have found you," he said softly. "I would have burned the world down to get you back." My throat tightened. "And what's left of you when there's nothing left to burn?" He laughed under his breath, bitter and quiet. "That's the part I never think about." I cleaned the wound in silence, though my hands trembled the whole time. Every breath he took was uneven, every movement slow, deliberate. I wanted to ask him why he never told me about the people who hated him, why he'd let me walk into this life blind, but the words felt small compared to the man bleeding in front of me. He'd already answered in every way that mattered. When I finished, I sat beside him, the towel stained dark in my hands. He was staring at the floor, lost somewhere far away. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he said after a long while. "Like what?" "Like I'm still something worth saving." I reached for him, tracing the edge of the bandage, the warmth of his skin beneath it. "You don't get to decide that," I said quietly. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. "You don't understand what you're tied to now. Every man I've ever trusted is dead or will be soon. They'll come. Again. Harder, smarter. They'll use anything they can. Then teach me, I said. He looked up sharply. What? Teach me how to survive your world, I said, my voice steady now. Because whether you wanted it or not, I'm already in it. He stared at me for so long I thought he might refuse. Then he said almost to himself, You're not afraid anymore. I am, I whispered, but I'm more afraid of losing you. That broke something in him. I saw it, the way his posture faltered, the way his mask slipped. He reached out, fingers brushing the side of my face, a touch so gentle it felt like an apology. You shouldn't love a man like me, he said. Then stop making it impossible not to. He laughed softly, the sound caught between pain and wonder. You have no idea what you've done to me. The storm outside built until the windows rattled, thunder rolling over the hills like a warning. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out into the darkness. They'll come again, he said. And when they do, it won't be to send messages. It'll be for you, or for the child. I rose, joining him at the window. The reflection of his face beside mine in the glass looked almost like a promise and a threat intertwined. Then let them come, I said. He turned to me, the corner of his mouth lifting in something that wasn't quite a smile. You talk like you don't know what war costs. Maybe I'm willing to pay it? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. A pendant. Gold. Old enough that the engraving had faded. He pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it. It belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it until the night she died. She believed it protected her. I looked at the pendant, then back at him. Did it? He shook his head. No. But she said it reminded her to hope. He let go of my hand and stepped back, his expression unreadable again. Keep it, he said. You'll need it more than I ever did. I wanted to ask him what that meant. But before I could, the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the room into darkness. Luca's voice was low, steady, calm in the way only men who live with violence can be. They're here, he whispered. And in the silence that followed, I realized the war he'd warned me about had already begun. The darkness wasn't silent. It breathed. It had weight, texture, a pulse that came alive between one flicker of light and the next. I heard the faint hum of the generator dying somewhere below, the mechanical groan of the estate surrendering to blackness, and then nothing. Nothing but the rain and the sound of Luca's steady breathing beside me. Too calm, too deliberate, like a wolf listening for the movement of its hunters. He reached for my arm, his grip strong, not cruel. Stay behind me, he whispered. No matter what, you hear, don't move unless I tell you. Before I could answer, the world split open. Glass shattered downstairs, the front door crashed inward, and shouts filled the air. Italian, English, the guttural language of men who came not to threaten, but to kill. I heard the metallic click of guns being drawn, the low growl of engines outside the gates. The war Luca had promised had arrived. He moved fast, dragging me toward the hallway, his body a shield between me and the chaos below. "Rosa!" he shouted, his voice a blade slicing through the noise. "Get her out!" A door burst open ahead of us, and Rosa appeared, pale but composed, holding a small pistol I hadn't known she owned. "This way," she said, motioning toward a narrow passage behind the bookshelf at the end of the hall. The wall panel slid aside with a groan, revealing a staircase that disappeared into darkness. "Go," Luca ordered. "I'm not leaving you," I said, but he pushed me toward Rosa. "You'll slow me down. Go." Something in his eyes stopped me from arguing. the same quiet fury I'd seen the night he'd come for me. The kind that left no space for words. I turned, half stumbling as Rosa pulled me through the opening, the panel sliding shut behind us just as gunfire tore through the walls above. The stairwell was narrow and steep, the air damp and cold. I gripped the railing to steady myself, every echo of footsteps above reminding me how close death could sound. "Where does this lead?" I whispered. Rosa didn't answer until we reached the bottom, her breath sharp in the silence. "The wine cellars. There's a tunnel that leads out to the North Woods. He built it years ago in case—" She stopped, her voice trembling. "In case something like this ever happened." The tunnels smelled of earth and stone, of old oak and forgotten secrets. I tried not to think about what was happening above us. The crack of gunfire, the shouted orders, the unmistakable thunder of rage that belonged to Luca when someone dared touch what was his. I could almost feel him up there, moving like a storm through the halls, ruthless and relentless, every step a vow to end whoever had come for us. We had almost reached the end of the tunnel when Rosa stopped suddenly. Her head tilted. "Do you hear that?" At first I thought it was just the wind. Then I heard it too. A soft echo of footsteps behind us, too light to be Luca's, too careful to be friendly. Rosa lifted her gun, her hands steady, and motioned for me to stay back. But the shot came before she could aim, a flash of light and sound that ripped through the dark. She crumpled without a sound. I didn't even have time to scream. The man stepped forward, his face lit faintly by the reflection of his gun. A face I recognized even before my mind caught up with memory. The scarred man from the warehouse, the one who had taken me. "Running again, little bird?" he said, his voice almost gentle. "You really should have learned by now. He can't protect you forever." My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. "You won't win," I said, though the words felt small in the dark. He smiled. "Oh, I already have. You're the wound that bleeds him dry." He raised the gun. I didn't think. I moved. I lunged toward Rosa's body, my hand closing around her pistol. The shot that followed was instinct, wild and desperate. The sound was deafening, the recoil jarring. The man staggered back, surprise flashing across his face, and fell. For a heartbeat, the silence afterward felt heavier than the noise that had filled it. I dropped the gun, my hands shaking, my body numb. I'd killed him. Or maybe just stopped him. But there was no time to think. Footsteps echoed again, louder this time, familiar. I turned, my breath catching as Luca appeared at the tunnel's entrance, blood on his hands, eyes blazing. He saw Rosa, saw me, saw the man on the floor, and for a moment everything inside him went still. Then he was at my side, his hand on my face, his voice a whisper of thunder. "You're shaking." He was going to— I know. His gaze shifted to the body, then back to me. "You did what you had to." I shook my head. "I didn't think, That's what surviving looks like," he said quietly. "Don't ever apologize for it." He lifted Rosa's body gently, his expression unreadable, and laid her on the ground. "She kept you safe," he murmured, almost like a prayer. "She always did." Then, more to himself than to me, "They'll pay for this." I touched his arm. "Luca." He turned, and in his eyes I saw something cold, something final. "No more mercy," he said. "Not for any of them." When we emerged from the tunnel, dawn was breaking, pale light bleeding into the fog that hung low over the trees. The estate was burning behind us, smoke curling into the sky like the ghost of everything that had once been untouchable. Luca stood there for a long time, watching the flames devour his empire, the reflection turning his face into something almost mythic. "This is what they wanted," he said softly, "to see me fall." "Then don't give them the satisfaction," I said. "You can rebuild. You've done it before." He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his expression broke. "You don't understand, Elise. I built everything I am on vengeance. Every brick of that house was laid with blood. If I rebuild, it'll be the same story again." "Then build something new," I said. "For us. For the child." For a moment, the world held its breath. His eyes softened, just a fraction, but enough for me to see the man beneath the monster again. He reached out, his fingers tracing the pendant still hanging around my neck. "You really think there's a way out of this?" "I think there has to be," I said. He smiled then, but it wasn't joy. It was defiance. "Then we'll find it," he said. "But first, I have to finish this." I frowned. "Finish what?" He turned toward the burning estate, the light from the flames dancing in his eyes. "The blood debt, the one my father died for, the one they tried to collect through you." "Luca." He looked back, and for the first time I saw peace in his face. Not because he was free, but because he'd finally accepted that freedom wasn't part of his fate. "I made a promise to him," he said. "And to you. One last war, and then it's over." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. Somewhere behind us, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Luca took my hand, pressed it against his chest, against the place where his heartbeat thundered like a war drum. "If I don't come back, don't say that," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll tell him, our son, that I tried." Before I could answer, he was gone, disappearing into the smoke like a ghost returning to the fire that made him. I stood there, the pendant warm in my hand, the sky turning gold above the ruins, and for the first time I realized the story wasn't about who would survive. It was about who could bear the cost. There are sounds that never truly leave you, no matter how many mornings rise to cover them. The sound of rain on glass after a night of gunfire. The echo of footsteps fading down a corridor you'll never walk again. The silence that follows when someone you love disappears into it. These are the sounds I live with now. They haunt the spaces between my breaths, turning the ordinary into memory, and the memory into ghosts. The estate was ash by sunrise. Flames had swallowed every piece of Luca's empire. The marble halls, the velvet curtains, the portrait of his father that had watched over the house like an unblinking god. The fire had not asked for permission. It had simply taken what was already half destroyed. I stood among the ruins for hours, numb, wrapped in one of Rosa's old shawls, my hands trembling around the pendant he'd given me. I think I expected to see him walk out of the smoke, bloodied but alive. That slow half-smile on his lips that always looked like defiance pretending to be calm. But the only thing that came out of that fire was silence. For 3 days, the city whispered. There were stories in every corner. Some said Luca Moretti was dead, shot through the heart before the house fell. Others swore he'd escaped, vanished into the night with nothing but his gun and his grief. I didn't know which to believe, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torture, like living in a world suspended between two truths, one too cruel, the other too kind to be real. Rosa was gone. Most of the men had fled. The empire he'd built on loyalty and fear had crumbled into smoke and ash. But the child inside me was still there, still small, still alive, reminding me with every breath that life doesn't wait for permission to continue. I spent those first weeks hiding in the small farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, where Rosa once sent food to the workers. The room smelled of rosemary and old wood, and though the wind howled through the cracks, I was safe. For the first time in months, there were no guards, no guns, no voices outside my door. Only the echo of the man who had promised to protect me, and the memory of his hand pressed over mine as he whispered the last words I ever heard him speak. "Promise me you'll live." It was strange, how life continued to happen even when your heart refused to follow. The days bled together in slow, quiet rhythms. The sun rising over the fields, the kettle whistling, the faint kick beneath my ribs that reminded me of everything I'd lost and everything I hadn't yet found. I learned to speak to the child inside me, not because I expected an answer, but because silence was unbearable. I told him stories about his father, not the man the world feared, but the one who sat beside me by the fire and pretended not to smile when I teased him. The one who looked at me like he was memorizing the shape of peace. Sometimes at night, when the wind carried the city's distant hum, I imagined him out there still, Luca, alive, watching from some shadow, keeping his promise from afar. I told myself he couldn't die, not truly. Men like him didn't belong to the earth. They belonged to the myths whispered in alleyways, the kind that never end, only disappear. Winter came early that year. I remember the first snow falling across the fields, soft and soundless, blanketing everything in a fragile kind of purity that didn't belong to the world I had known. I was sitting by the window when I saw it, a shape at the edge of the woods, dark against the white. For a moment, my heart stopped. The silhouette didn't move, didn't speak. Then it lifted a hand, slow, uncertain, like someone remembering how to reach for something they'd once believed was gone. I was outside before I realized what I was doing, the cold biting at my skin, my breath breaking into clouds of frost. "Luca!" I called, though my voice cracked on the name. The figure stepped forward. For a heartbeat, the world held itself still. He was thinner, his coat torn, his face marked by the kind of exhaustion that only comes from clawing your way back from death. But it was him. Alive. Real. The impossible turned flesh. I ran to him, the snow crunching underfoot, the wind howling between us. When I reached him, I didn't stop to think. My hands found his face, cold and rough beneath my palms, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. He caught me in his arms, holding me like something sacred, something stolen back from the grave. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice rough, raw, shaking with everything he wasn't saying. "I've been waiting," I said. "I didn't know if—" "I made a promise," he interrupted, his forehead pressing against mine. "I wasn't going to break it." I pulled back enough to see his face, to trace the new scars there. "You're hurt." "I've been worse," he said, almost smiling. "They're gone, Elise. All of them. Every last one. The debt's paid." I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to let those words wash away the fear that had haunted me. But all I could see in his eyes was what it had cost him. There was no triumph there, only the emptiness that comes when revenge finishes its work and leaves you with nothing to hold but ashes. "What now?" I asked softly. He looked past me, toward the horizon where the fields met the sky. "Now," he said, "I don't know. I've never had to live for anything but war." "Then learn," I whispered. "Learn with me." He laughed softly, and for the first time it sounded real, unguarded. "You always did ask for the impossible. And you always did make it happen." We walked back to the farmhouse together, his hand entwined with mine, his steps heavy but certain. Inside, the fire burned low, the light soft and golden against the walls. He sank into the chair by the hearth, watching me with the same quiet intensity he had the night he'd confessed his truth. I brewed tea, hands trembling, heart racing, afraid that if I looked away for even a moment, he might vanish again. When I finally sat beside him, he reached for my hand, his thumb brushing the inside of my wrist where the scars from the ropes had long since faded. "Does he know?" he asked quietly, glancing toward my stomach. "He will," I said, "when he's old enough to understand the kind of man his father really was." He smiled, faint and tired. "Then tell him the good parts." "I'll tell him everything," I said, "even the parts that hurt." We sat there in silence, watching the fire eat slowly through the wood. The world outside was still broken, still dangerous, still painted in shades of gray. But for the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that lives beside it, learning to breathe again. Luca closed his eyes, the lines of his face softening. "You saved me," he murmured. "No," I said, resting my head against his shoulder. "We saved each other." Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet and endless. I thought of the pendant around my neck, warm against my skin, and of his mother's words, "It reminds you to hope." Maybe that was what we were doing now, hoping. Building something new from everything the fire hadn't claimed. And as the wind whispered through the eaves and the firelight danced across his face, I finally understood what he'd meant all along. That love in his world wasn't gentle, or safe, or easy. It was survival. It was the war after the war. It was the promise that no matter how much the world took, something in us would always rise from the ashes and keep reaching for the light.